Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Mystical Motherhood Podcast. This is Pritam Atma, author of Alchemy of Becoming, Fertile, and Mystical Motherhood, all available on Amazon and on my website, Mystical Motherhood. And today I am dedicating this podcast. It's a solo podcast, and I'm spending a lot of time talking about the heart opening process because I believe it will give you some clarity on the level of chaos that's happening in the world and to understand how going into your heart is the real and the only way to navigate the level of fear that's trying to take you out of it. So in my book, Alchemy of Becoming, I go through the stages of the heart opening process, and I talk about the letting go of the story. And the story is the identification with something in your life, like a pain or a fear or a partner or something that's consistently playing out. And there'll be a main story, and then you'll have other little stories from that, brothers and sisters that come off of that painful story that keeps playing out in your life and separating you from your heart and from your Christ consciousness and from who you really are. So once you let go of the parts of yourself that are identified with this outside story, who are you? You have to find that out, and you will be a more peaceful and loving person when you do so. I have found that the people recently are playing out very chaotic stories in their life in general around the planet and personally. And in order to navigate this, we have to find a new frequency, and that frequency is based in the heart. And that's how we're going to change this world. I did my best in this podcast to take you through these steps of transformation. If you have any questions, reach out to me at www.mysticalmotherhood.com or on Instagram at mysticalmotherhood. Enjoy and have a good week. I wanted to take a significant amount of time in this podcast to go over the heart opening process as documented from my book, Alchemy of Becoming. Again, I've talked about it in various podcasts, and I've brought on people who are going through it to give you a reference point of what happens when you are going from the mind to the heart to the mind to the heart, and you're letting go of your chaotic story. And it's so important right now because I've had so many recent, women enter my clinic, and women come to me that are in this chaos. They're in this story. They're in this story that's yearning for love or yearning for something outside of themselves. And their mind is in complete chaos, and they can't see. They can't see the reality how it is. And that's how the world is right now. And so there's this massive chaos going on an outer story. And then within all of our lives, if you're not in your heart center, there's going to be more and more chaotic moments or things that take you out of yourself, that bring you out of peace. Anything that is darkness on this planet right now is something that brings you to your mind. And so let me give you a reference point. Most of the time you're in your mind all the time. And in your mind is what I describe as you're always doing, you're always going, you're always thinking that something else, has to be done. You have to do in order to succeed. You have to be successful. You have to constantly be checking things off a list. There's never downtime. There's never peace. There's never doing nothing, because doing nothing is scary. Doing nothing means that you're not accomplishing, that you're not, something must be wrong if you're calm and you're doing nothing. It's actually the opposite. And that doing nothing and getting into your body and feeling your body and going through the feelings is what actually brings you to the present moment when you're not in the past or the future. And I know that there's a lot of people out there, and there's a lot of different methods, even that I have done. But most of the methods on this planet are mind-based methods. They're methods of meditation or spiritual practice that bring you back into the mind. So it's just redirecting the mind. So it's redirecting from the mind from something that may be painful or hurtful to putting it into something that, seems a little bit better at the time. But it's not actually getting you out of your mind story and dropping you into the heart. In order to get into the heart, You actually have to go through the feelings and the emotions that block the heart from opening and block the heart from experiencing the bliss that is around you at all time, which Jesus would call heaven on earth. You have to become a child again in that feeling of nothing matters. I'm moving to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next things, and I'm totally trusting and surrendering into something bigger than myself. So there's a lot of opportunities on this planet right now to go through this heart opening process. The only way that you're going to feel peace on the planet moving forward is if you move into the heart. There's nothing else. The news is going to get crazier. The stories are going to get wilder. The control is going to be more. The chaos within your life will bring up the things that need to get you centered again. So whatever story is playing out in your life right now, it's probably linked back to something from the past or one of your biggest fears. And it's looping in your life as a story to keep you in the mind's control mechanism, right? So if you look at a story, you can kind of imagine the mind story. It's like an entity of itself. And it's a subconscious belief system or a programming or a conditioning from your childhood or from your past that's constantly playing out in different forms in your life. And it literally is it's like a cancer growing within your mind. And if you take it outside of your mind, if you actually energetically take it outside of your mind and look at it from 2 or 3 different ways, there's always a different way to look at this story. There's a different way it can play out. There's a different way it can manifest. It's a different way you can actually look at it. Sometimes it can even be positive. You can look at it from a positive view, and then you can turn around and look at it from a negative view. And because you can do this, because it's so functional and almost alive in itself, these ridiculous stories we play out, and I'll give you some examples. We know they're not real. And we know that they're malleable, and we know that because they're so malleable, and because there's no truth to it, the truth is just what you're creating in the moment. They can go away and they can come back, but because then they're not real. So, and either is all of the things we do in our life constantly, the doing. What does it lead to? For example, we spent years studying, and a good example is if you're going to school and you're constantly studying to get an A, and then you never use that information later. Or you're working super, super hard for a job, and then you recognize, what am I doing this for? Another form of this massive doing, which is part of your story of, whatever, of success maybe, would be, I heard a lot of women come to me later in life and say, I've missed my entire children's parenthood, even though I was a stay-at-home mother and I was with them all the time. I missed their childhood because I was always somewhere different. I was never with them. I was never present in the moment. I was always worrying about my story. My story always won out. So the story could be, it's usually based on lower frequency emotions, and there's a feeling to those. So it's like loneliness, depression, abandonment, chaos, just different feelings. That's like a base frequency. And so when your base frequency is at that, though you think it's somewhere different, it's really low. And at that, you're going to attract that in your life in order to heal it, in order to see parts of it. And so there'll be moments you're in your heart as you go through the heart opening process. And when you're in your heart, you'll feel peaceful, calm, kind of like when you're at a calm lake, or you feel the breeze going through the trees, or you have a moment in yoga or whatever that you're wow, that's amazing. And if you're not used to that base feeling of peace, and there's very little peace on the planet right now, so who is? If you turn on the news, that is the example of the story. It's the fear-based experience where you're kind of on edge, but none of it's actually real. None of it's actually happening in your day-to-day life, but yet it's existing somewhere. So you think it is you. So when you're opening your heart, the story becomes bigger in your face. And then you go so the story, your mind will just unwind and it'll become so chaotic, and you're trying to work through it. And then you'll have moments of peace. You get into your heart, and then you go to your head again. and you go to your heart again, and you go to your head again. And that's the part of the heart opening process. You have to go through the feelings, and you have to identify your story. And when you're in your heart, you'll feel peace. And when you're in your head, you'll feel nuts. And then I describe that in my book as you'll almost feel like you're bipolar as you're going through this deep process, which may take you 10 years. It may take you, 1 year. It depends on how fast your consciousness moves and how much help you have as you're moving along the process. So, and when you're in it, if somebody finally tells you you're going through it, you might feel less nuts about it. Oh, my heart's, I'm feeling all my past. I'm seeing my story. This is why this is playing out. If I know where I am in the heart opening process, which is what Alchemy of Becoming is all about, I know that I can move to the next step and I'm progressing. And this is all making me actually into a better person as I let go of the feelings, the emotions, the desires, the identity that keeps me away from my heart and my center, and that level of Christ consciousness that's needed on the planet right now. In my last podcast, I took some time to briefly go over how important it is for women on the planet to move into their heart. And my work with mystical motherhood moving forward is going to be more and more about getting women into their heart. And as it develops, which I'm sure it will as I move forward in the years, I would love to hear how everyone's story is developing, but also I'll find a way to help more people get there. And there are lots of resources I know now, and I'll list them at the end. But right now, all I know is as we're starting this process on the planet, people are going to be mostly in their mind, and that's the chaos. And so what is the mind? The mind is the doing. The mind is the greed. The mind is the need to constantly have things outside of ourselves. The mind needs more. The mind is never happy with where it's at. It always, gets to a place in life where, let's say you get the house, let's say you get the house, you get the job, you get the kids, you get the car, you get the thing, and then you're still not happy, right? There may be real reasons for that, but sometimes it's the mind story playing out like I need more to be happy. I can't be in peace within myself, right? So the mind is also very male. And because women are quite male on the planet, and we have thought, in order to gain our power back, we thought that becoming more male would give us more power. But our power actually lies within the heart center, within the being, within the less doing, within the presence, within the nature of things, which it doesn't have to do so much. It doesn't have to make so much. It doesn't need more to be happy. It is happy within the motherhood. It's happy within the cooking and the playing and the joy and the ocean and the colors and the decorating and all the things that we all love at that base level. And I'm not saying it's not, women aren't happy within their work, but most of us don't know what that work is yet. And because of that, we're stuck in the motherhood process, and we're really, really, we feel frustrated and upset because we haven't found our calling, and we don't know what our calling is because we're not in our heart center. We're connected to the story of our mind. And it is only through our heart center that destiny really unfolds. And we see what that is, which your destiny, as you get into your heart and become more peaceful within yourself, you may find that your destiny is just being a mother. You may find that your destiny is volunteering at this local place that is like so important to you, and you're helping so many lives. But no matter what your destiny is, it no longer is about yourself. It is no longer, there's no joy in your chaos of your own world. And there's no joy in the chaos of your story that's keeping you away from your heart center. And a lot of people think out there, I have found more and more that there's a lot of spiritual leaders that take people on their journeys, but haven't really been through the journey themselves. And because of that, they're teaching from a level that isn't so pure. And as I've gone through my own various spiritual journeys, I have found that spirituality, the doing in the spirituality, the doing that we have to, like the people say, oh, you have to do this practice to get there. Sometimes we do have to do those practices to raise our frequency enough. But oftentimes that's just another mind game. It's another meditation that gets you into the mind, or, it's not real spirituality. Real spirituality is more, it's less. It's more feeling, it's more body-based, it's more nature-based, it's in the nothingness, it's in the emptiness. And yes, you may have to go through that process to empty yourself, but it feels in the end, it's in the nothing. And so in my book, Alchemy of Becoming, I talk about these stages of awakening. And it's so important for what's happening on the planet right now to give everyone a guide to what to expect as you go through it on an internal scale and on an external scale. And I broke these stages down using the Emerald Tablet. The Emerald Tablet is a technology brought to Earth from Egypt. The Egyptians, one of their biggest spiritual understandings was, how light can your heart become? And that means, how many things can you let go of in your life to truly connect to spirit and into that Christ consciousness? And that Christ consciousness is a crystal of energy. What that is, what is Christ? Christ is a crystal. It's an energetic field. And when you're in your heart, your energetic field is much bigger. When you're in your mind, it's a very low frequency of fear-based issues. So this process of the Emerald Tablet, of breaking into the heart, is what raises your energetic fields to get there, because you're breaking apart the mind-based programming and conditioning that you have grown up with, that is specific to you and specific to society, to get into that heart center. And right now, the darkness on the planet is trying to do everything to get you in your mind. Because in the mind, they have control over you. And in your mind, without sovereignty over your thoughts and over your belief systems and over your body and over yourself, you'll go crazy. You'll go nuts. So they know that. And so the only way to escape what's happening right now is to go deeper into being, not so much into the doing. So the first stage of this awakening, which I've talked about in other podcasts, is called calcination. And this stage, it breaks down the attachment to the material world. So in this stage, something big usually comes into your life that just destroys you, right? It's the divorce. It is a massive event. It's COVID. Whatever it is, your biggest fear blows in your face. Your biggest fear. And then as a result of that, you kind of come out of it as, who am I? Who am I? Like, who am I if I'm not this? If I'm not who I thought if I'm not, like, it could be like, maybe you're a spiritual teacher and all of a sudden all your students despise you. Or maybe you are married and you get divorced and you've always been identified with being married. Or maybe you were super healthy and then you thought you were healthy and something comes along in your illness in your body. It's something that blows your belief systems out of the water, and you have to really understand who you are through that. It could be finding out, your father was a rapist, or it blows you away. Like, holy shit, I didn't know this was possible. And it begins to burn a fire within you. And that's the element of fire, which I talk about in my 2 books, Fertile and Alchemy of Becoming. The fire begins to burn away the old constructs and belief systems that hold you back and box you in life. So as the mind is so, imagine the mind as a hard rock. You have to take it through all the elements to really, really, to take that story and make it malleable, right? You have to break that story down, and you have to use the elements, because that's the strongest force that we have on this planet. Then as the fire begins to burn away these huge belief systems, burn away the parts of your life that you thought were real, that you thought were important, and this is usually based on money. It's based on, houses. It's based on greed. It's based on huge identification structures that are usually connected to society. And once you realize that once you realize how, like, stupid you were, basically, and how silly you were, and you begin to see that nothing you thought was real was real. So maybe it's that you're married and your husband was cheating on you, and you thought you guys were a good couple. Like you had made a delusion in your head that was so strong. You're like, oh, we're the greatest couple. And then you find out he was cheating on you the whole time. Or maybe you thought your job was so secure and then you were fired. Or maybe you wanted a baby so bad and then you got the baby and you're miserable. Well, you were not happy the whole time. You just weren't conscious of it. So once you have this level of a shock in your life, and that's really what's required, is a huge shock to the system to shake the rock up, the rock begins to just crumble a little bit. Imagine that. And so that means that you become conscious of things you were unaware of. And so it's like you're living a life that's not real. You're living from an identity that wasn't true. And that's always true with the spirituality is like, it's like letting go of part. You thought you were this persona, you thought you were this person, and then you're like, I'm not. I don't even like that, or that's not me at all. But it's because everything was based off of your conditioning and your subconscious thought forms. So you have to go deep into the emotional parts of yourself that even believed this. And it's all the unresolved wounds. So as you go through the next phase of the heart opening process, you go through disillusion, and it's the heavy feelings, the wounds of the heart, all these different experiences that need to be released, and you'll cry. It is a really, really heavy, heavy part of the heart opening process. I mean, it's like, I had no idea my life was that crazy. I had no idea it was so lonely. I had no idea, like, you've always been lonely. Or you've always had issues like these issues, but you weren't aware of them. And so when you become aware of them, you have to feel them. And you have to feel them on such a deep level that it's like, it feels profound. Like, do I have depression? Do I have this? Like, what's going on? And a lot of people are at that level right now. They're just barely like understanding. So they can't. And then they'll go back to living a normal life. And then they'll go back into this depression. And it's like all the unconscious parts of your life. So maybe if you were sexually abused, you have to look at that story. Maybe if you were, you're having a bulimia or you have fear issues, all these different things, right? So then you begin, as you move out of the dissolution, you begin to go into the phase of separation. And this is when you take a real intimate look at your personality and the conditioning from your past. And you have to begin to build a new persona or identify yourself as something different. So you have to separate yourself out from who you were before. And that separation process is like, well, who am I now if I'm no longer that person? So let's say you get a divorce and you identified as being a wife in this particular house. Well, as you find out who you are, who are you? Who are you if you're working? Who are you if you're a single mom? Who are you if you're dating? Who are you? Or let's say you find out that your father was a convicted murderer. Well, you always thought, who are you with a father that's a convicted murderer? Like now, if you don't have the identity of like a father that's this, or there's so many examples I can give you. Or if you're finally getting, like, let's say you're a mom and you're a stay-at-home mom and you got the house, you got the life you wanted, you got everything. And then you thought this is what you wanted, right? And then you realize like, well, this isn't, I'm not happy still. Well, who are you? Like what you were basing your happiness based on what your family programmed you to teach you that happiness was. So as you find out, like as you take away the conditioning from your past, you have to, that's a persona. It's not even who you are. Like you actually, if you took away all your conditioning, you may be happy as a farmer. Like you may be that, and that's your true calling. And what your true calling may be like, I like to grow. This is such a funny example. Like I like to grow tomatoes and be in nature by a farm. That may actually be what your heart's desire is, but your life has been lived out from the programming of your mind. And as a result of that, you're contributing to the chaos of the world. And you're also not happy in that chaos because it's not who you really are. So you have to integrate. You have to begin the process of integration and separating out this old identifications and these old wounds and these old parts of yourself that no longer are in the new version of who you are. So the separation is done by the element air. And in that process, it's like physical, emotional, and mental things will quickly be taken away. And you begin to release your old ways of being. So you begin to consciously review the unconscious parts of yourself and decide what to release. And so specifically in this stage, you'll release phobias. So phobias are obsessions, are attachments, are, specific parts of your life, or neurotic tendencies. And neurotic tendencies are so broad. And that may be like the need to constantly be doing, the anxious part of yourself that's never happy. It's the part that's constantly cleaning, or the part that needs to run your kids around all over. And I don't know, it's broad. Then you'll move into the conjunction stage. And each parts of these stages, you could be in these stages for years. You could be in them for months. It depends on your consciousness and how much you have to let go of. So the conjunction is the phase where you merge the conscious and the unconscious parts of yourself. So that means it's the element earth comes into balance here, and you begin to build a new reality. So because in separation phase, you were taking away the parts of yourself that weren't really you. They weren't really like, oh, I actually didn't like being a stay-at-home mom, or I actually didn't like working. I really want to be with my kids more. You didn't even know that until you begin to know who you are. You're just basically running your life off a program. So then when you say, oh, I really want to be with my kids more, and maybe I want to cut back on work, maybe I want to cut back on spending. And so then I can make that part of my heart happy. And that part of my heart that wants to be in being with my children, I want to focus on that instead of the part of me that needs to keep going, right? So you can join, or that's not a word. You go into the conjunction stage and you experience the world in a more stable and balanced way. So the conjunction stage, you may build a little business at home. It's the integration of the new you. It is maybe you buy a home somewhere and you kind of lay down roots as you're moving into your new life, or you get a new job that's more of who you are. It's examples of it's kind of like a progression forward on the physical realm of maybe a house or a baby, or it's something that you actually produce that makes you more of who you really are, not of what your programming's based off of. And as you're moving through all of these phases, I have to say, the story will continue to play out. And in my book, Alchemy of Becoming, I help you understand what your story is. So some people and what spirituality is really understanding your thoughts and your stories and breaking them down and seeing that none of them are real. And that's what's taking you out of your heart center. All meditation is trying to do is teach you that, but it doesn't say that. It just says, let's redirect your thoughts away from your stories. What we really want to do is just eliminate the stories. So, in conjunction phase, you often think that the process is over. And most people don't even make it to the conjunction stage. Most people don't even let go of their identities at all. They keep on playing out the chaos. And it's specifically hard when the world is in a chaos. The world only mirrors to you chaos. So you think that, your chaos can't compare, or, that it's impossible to let it go because everyone else is in trauma. And so letting that go and building a new life that's based on more peace is different, and there's not a lot of examples of people doing it out there. So it's you're often tested to go back into the chaos of the mind. And even as you're going through this, so if you make it to the stage of conjunction, you begin to build your new life, and you begin to, build based off of thoughts based on love and not on the chaos, you'll get tested. And this is the tested beyond your wildest beliefs. So this is the stage of fermentation and purification in the Emerald Tablet. So in fermentation and putrefaction, it's a complete death of your old world. And it's really intense. So if you thought that what you went through before was intense, like the calcination stage of the fire, and then the crying, and then the separation of, your identity, it's almost like you have your consciousness and your energy field has to rise to such a level to such a profound level. And this may take many lifetimes to get to. It may happen within this lifetime because the world's moving so quickly. It is where you begin to kind of maybe it's in the dream world you begin to rise up, or maybe you begin to go into these higher spiritual practices. Maybe you feel the heart center more often. And it is the death of your old story almost completely. And in order for that old story to completely die, it has to come back into your life. So say your story is based on abandonment, there'll be something that comes in that tests your how well you're doing on being abandoned. If it's a story about the male, you'll have another partner come in that'll test you. And these tests will consistently come back until you leave the mind story around it, until you're really ready to let go and grip on the attachment of this material realm of this story that will play out. It's not fun. It's very irritating. It's kind of painful. And you feel still like the mind to the heart. So it feels a little nutty. Like, why is the story coming back in to test me? In order for you to hold true to your new life, the psychological testing will bring you into that higher power, into that higher force. So that's, as you move through it, you'll go into distillation, which is like the stage of purification. So the agitation of the human mind, so the agitation of all of the identities, of all of the stories you hold, of all the parts that you thought were real in your life will come up for healing. And it's almost like you go back to the beginning, but it doesn't affect you the same way. So we all have, many stories, but we have one story that consistently plays out, and it'll keep playing out in those forms. And that's the story that keeps you out of your heart. So as you move through these phases of awakening, the story will get tested in your mind, and you'll be brought back into the mind. And until you identify what it is, it's once you identify what the story is, you won't feel crazy as you're being tested going through the spiritual process. And eventually you'll get tested so much that you eventually make it into phases of longer peace. And that longer peace in the Emerald Tablet is called coagulation, but what it's really called is presence. And so there's authors that write on this, and some examples are like Byron Katie and Eckhart Tolle, Wayne Dyer occasionally, but it's the no mind. It's the happiness in doing nothing. You'll get to a point, you'll see how silly the stories were, and you'll see how the stories held you back from peace. It held you back from the presence with your children. It held you back from being with the right man. It held you back from being in the right job. And they're not real. And so in the coagulation phase, it's the whole in human being. It's the conscious interacting with the world from the heart level, from a level of love, and it's less doing. So if you had based your whole identity on for me, it was always I was always doing, I was always writing a book. I was always creating. I was always, onto the next job, onto my resume. I was always in the doing, and I thought that was successful. I thought that was what I was supposed to be doing in spirituality, more meditation, more doing, more, and it's not. The deepest, the purest form of spirit is in the nothing. It's in that piece of the heart that flows out. It's in the doing, and from that piece, the doing arises from the level of the heart. So you only are doing when it's in coherence with the heart and not the mind. And in order to get there, you have to go through these processes to see how silly the human, all of our identities and all of our greed and all of what we think is important in this world isn't so important, because when you die, you don't take that with you. So again, back to what it means on this planet and the power that the woman has to go into the heart center. I have seen a pattern where we think that I don't know if it's like, I don't know if I call it the feminist movement, or I don't know what it would be, but we think that success is based off of what a man has created. We are creating our lives and comparing ourselves based off what men do, right? So like, and we're going a little bit nuts doing that. So we would say, a lot of people in our world would say success is based off of, making more money, having a great job, and doing everything. So as women, we are trying to be both successful in our career and in our children, with our children. If we're just at home, we're not even finding happiness in just being at home with our children and in those things, because there is this weird success or doing around the planet for women and men, that doing more it creates, like that situation will make you happy. That situation will bring you glory. But in a reality, a lot of women feel very toxic. Like that's one of the biggest issues as women, is like we feel there's the balance between the motherhood and the doing. Going into these men-based work, facilities, and either you have to choose to become a man and work in the mind and doing all that, or you feel like torn and you have to leave, and then you're at home and then you feel lost within being at home. All of that is just not being in your heart center and being happy with who you are. So we're playing out identifications and stories based on what we think success is on a man's world. And we're taking away from ourselves. So if we were more in our heart, which we're learning what that is on the planet, and if we're more in our heart, we can bring men more in their heart. And when you're in your heart, you don't need as much. When your heart, you can be present with your children for longer. When you're in your heart, you're happy walking the ocean because there's not as much to do. You don't need to spend more money and create a world that's actually based off of things you think you need, but you don't really make you happy in the end. So getting into the heart provides that level of presence. It provides that joy in whatever arises. And it's a place of allowing. And it's only from that place of allowing that you can be in peace in the general chaos that's happening in the world. So what's happening in the world isn't going to get better. It's going to continually get worse. And especially because the amount of information that's being blown at you is going to come at you from so many angles. And you can't avoid it. It's always there. The only way to avoid it is to really isolate yourself and to go into nature. But in that isolation and in that nature is how you will get into the being. In the world that is this media frenzy that's happening right now, that's bringing you out of your heart and into the mind, the way that the darkness is going to take out the light on this planet, darkness is controlling this planet at a rate of 90 to 95%. And it's trying to take out each light. So if we think of ourselves as a light army, it's trying to take out each light. What is a light worker on this planet? What's a light? Let's just say if you think you're a light worker, or I don't even know what that word means, but whatever if you think you're trying to do something good for this planet and you identify yourself as, if you're listening to this, you are. So how do you take out a light? You bring the light to the mind. And what is the mind? It's the identification with fear, with greed, with ignorance, with things outside of yourself. It's not in peace. So the only way to win against the darkness right now is to be in your heart and not to get around the stories that are being created. And I'm repeating again from the beginning of this podcast. These stories are mind-based forms of almost like a cancerous growth of like a deep rock. And they're your own, and they're magnified on a grand scale, on a mini scales of chaos. So know that you're not nuts. Know that the darkness is magnifying your story. And you are also doing that because that's the energy of the planet. So coming out of that is your strength and is your power and is your light. If you're confused of how to do that right now, well, you can, if you need a reference, listen to this podcast again, and listen to my past podcasts where I talk about this with other women as they're going through this heart opening process. Our power on this planet is through the Christ consciousness. It is through the power of the heart, which is this great and grand energy. If you're needing a way to get there, because of the amount of chaos on this planet right now, some of the best ways is to go into nature. It's going into being more often. It's going into silence more often. It's being grateful if you don't have a job and you have time. It's being grateful that you have time with your children. It's being grateful for the peace in the space. And you'll get there more by saying, okay, my mind is identifying with a thought right now that isn't true. This isn't true. I can look at it from one way. I can look at it from another way. Byron Katie has great books. So I'm looking at, exactly what I'm talking about right now is my thought true? And it's never true. So once you understand that nothing you're thinking is true, you can then begin to get to your heart more. So if you have any questions about this, please DM me on social media at Mystical Motherhood, right into mysticalmotherhood.com. If you're feeling agitated, like I feel like I can't do anything, like what are the resources? Well, there's lots of resources on my website, www.mysticalmotherhood.com. I'm really liking Joe Dispenza. He's a great resource to get you into the heart. I know I've talked about so many different resources in all these podcasts, but he's another great one. I have no particular. I do love Kundalini yoga because I think it raises your energy, but I think there's a lot of great things out there that get you into your heart that work just as well or better. And it depends on you. But just know that everyone's going through this process. You're not alone. You'll feel a little bit crazy as you go through it. But Alchemy of Becoming, my book that's available on Amazon, is so helpful in understanding where you're at and identifying like, okay, as I move through this stage, I'll go to the next stage and my consciousness will rise. If you need a private session with me to talk about these mind-based, chaos you're going through and to see that it's a story, reach out to me and I'll take you through the process that I have designed in this book. And if you need any help with conception or pregnancy or getting, understanding the elements, please read my first two books, Mystical Motherhood and Fertile. There's also courses online for all of these things I speak about, for pregnancy and conception and the heart opening process as you become a better mother and a better woman on this planet, sending you the deepest love through the hardest times.